Welcome to Mr. Crimeshow. In this episode, I've gathered 8 chilling true crime stories, each one unsettling, mysterious, and full of dark twists. With rain softly playing in the background and a black screen for night listening, this compilation is perfect for relaxing, unwinding, or falling asleep to true crime. If you like our work, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. The barrels in the woods that took 30 years to open. On a quiet November morning in 1985, a hunter walking through Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire, made a discovery that would haunt investigators for decades. Inside a metal barrel hidden among the trees lay the remains of a woman and a young girl, their lives taken years earlier. What seemed like an isolated tragedy would become one of the most complex murder cases in American history, involving multiple identities, advanced DNA technology, and a killer who managed to hide his true face for over 30 years. The woman found in that first barrel was Marlies Elizabeth Honeychurch, just 24 years old when her life was taken by the actions of a man who had promised to love her. Beside her lay the remains of her 6-year-old daughter, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, a little girl who had trusted the wrong person with her mother's heart. Investigators determined that both had lost their lives under violent circumstances, their futures stolen in a moment of cruelty. The killer had placed their remains in that barrel and left them in the woods, treating them like discarded objects rather than human beings who had been cherished by their families. 15 years would pass before investigators realized the true scope of this tragedy. In May 2000, a second barrel was discovered just 100 yards from the first, containing the remains of 2 more young girls. One was identified as Sarah Lynn McWaters, Marlies' youngest daughter, who had been barely 2 years old when her life was cut short. The other child, a girl between 2 and 4 years old, would remain nameless for nearly 25 more years. All 4 victims had been in those woods since the late 1970s or early 1980s, waiting for someone to find them and tell their story. The family that was torn apart began with hope and dreams of a better life. Marlies Honeychurch had been married twice before and was a devoted mother trying to build a future for her children. Marie Elizabeth Vaughn was born from her first marriage, and Sarah Lynn McWaters came from her second relationship. Despite the challenges of being a single mother in the 1970s, Marlies worked hard to provide for her daughters and dreamed of finding someone who would love them all as a family. Her children were everything to her, and those who knew them remembered Marie and Sarah as bright, beautiful little girls who brought joy wherever they went. In late 1978, Marlies thought she had found that special someone when she met Terry Pedder Rasmussen, a charming electrician who seemed to offer the stability she had been seeking. Rasmussen, who would later become known as the Chameleon Killer, for his ability to assume different identities, presented himself as a caring man who wanted to be part of their lives. He was skilled at manipulation, knowing exactly what to say to win the trust of vulnerable women and their children. For Marlies, who had experienced failed relationships before, Rasmussen appeared to be the answer to her prayers. The last time Marlies' family saw her alive was during Thanksgiving dinner in November 1978 at her mother's home in La Puente, California. She had brought Rasmussen to meet her family, introducing him as her new boyfriend and hopeful future. The evening should have been filled with gratitude and family warmth, but it ended with tension and heartbreak. After what witnesses described as a small family disagreement, Marlies made a fateful decision that would seal the fate of her entire family. She gathered her belongings, took Marie and Sarah by the hand, and walked out the door with Rasmussen, never to be seen alive again. What happened next remains one of the most chilling aspects of this case. Rasmussen, using the false identity, Bob Evans, took Marlies and her daughters across the country to New Hampshire, where he worked as an electrician in Manchester. He had connections to property in Allenstown, giving him the perfect opportunity to carry out his deadly plan without detection. Sometime between 1978 and 1981, Rasmussen ended the lives of all 3 members of this innocent family. The specific details of their final moments have never been revealed, but investigators believe they endured violence that left them unable to survive. But Rasmussen's crimes did not stop there. During his relationship with Marlies, he had also been involved with another woman, Pepper Reed, born in 1952 in Texas. Pepper became pregnant with Rasmussen's child, giving birth to a daughter named Rhea Rasmussen in 1976 in Orange County, California. Like so many other women who encountered Terry Rasmussen, Pepper Reed disappeared in the late 1970s and has never been seen since. Investigators strongly believe she too lost her life due to Rasmussen's actions, though her remains have never been located. Little Rhea, left without her mother's protection, became the fourth victim found in the barrels, her short life ending alongside the family that had briefly given her a sense of belonging. For over 30 years, these four victims remained nameless, known only as the Allenstown Four or the Bear Brook murders. Investigators worked tirelessly to identify them, but without modern DNA technology and genealogical databases, their efforts repeatedly hit dead ends. The case grew cold, but it never left the hearts and minds of the detectives who had seen their remains and felt the weight of their unfinished stories. Annual vigils were held in Allenstown, where community members gathered to remember four people whose names they did not even know. The breakthrough that would eventually solve this case came through the persistence of one man's criminal behavior. In December 1999, Terry Rasmussen, now using the identity Larry Vanner, met chemist Yoon Jun at a party in Richmond, California. Jun, 42 years old and successful in her career, became Rasmussen's next victim. They entered into what she believed was a loving relationship, even participating in a backyard wedding ceremony, though it was never legally recognized. In June 2002, Yoon Jun disappeared from her home, and her concerned friend reported her missing to police. The investigation into Jun's disappearance would be Rasmussen's downfall. In September 2002, police brought him in for questioning, and he voluntarily provided his fingerprints. When those fingerprints came back as belonging to Curtis Kimball, a wanted parolee from California, investigators knew they had caught him in another lie. A search of his residence revealed evidence that Jun had lost her life there, confirming their worst fears. Terry Rasmussen was formally charged with the first-degree murder of Yoon Jun in November 2002. The courtroom proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Rasmussen chose to avoid a lengthy trial by pleading guilty to Jun's murder in June 2003. The judge sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison, ensuring he would never again harm innocent people. During the sentencing, family members of Yoon Jun spoke about the brilliant, kind woman whose life had been cut short by Rasmussen's cruelty. The conviction brought some measure of justice for Jun's family, but it would be years before anyone realized this case held the key to solving the Bear Brook murders. Rasmussen died in his California prison cell in December 2010, succumbing to illness. He had served only 7 years of his sentence, taking his secrets to the grave. His death seemed to close the book on his crimes, but investigators were far from finished with Terry Rasmussen. His ashes were scattered at sea, denying his victims' families even the satisfaction of knowing where his remains lie. The connection between Rasmussen and the Bear Brook murders began to emerge through advances in DNA technology and genetic genealogy. In 2016, investigators confirmed that one of the children found in the second barrel was Rasmussen's biological daughter. This discovery led to renewed interest in his activities during the late 1970s and early 1980s. In 2017, genetic genealogist Barbara Rae-Venter used cutting-edge DNA analysis to definitively identify Bob Evans as Terry Pedder Rasmussen, finally revealing his true identity after decades of deception. The identification of the victims required a combination of scientific innovation and old-fashioned detective work. Rae-Venter faced significant challenges because the victims' DNA had severely degraded after years of exposure to the elements. Traditional DNA extraction methods failed repeatedly, but a breakthrough came when forensic scientists developed new techniques to recover autosomal DNA from rootless hair samples. At the same time, amateur investigator Rebecca Heath was scouring internet forums and missing person databases, looking for families who might be searching for lost loved ones. Heath's dedication to finding answers led her to discover online posts from family members looking for Marley's Honeychurch and her daughters. The details matched perfectly with what investigators knew about 3 of the Bear Brook victims. When family members mentioned that Marley's had last been seen with a man named Rasmussen, Heath knew she had found the missing link. She submitted her findings to law enforcement in October 2018, providing the crucial tip that would finally give the victims their names back. On June 6, 2019, New Hampshire authorities held a press conference that brought closure to one of the state's most notorious cold cases. Senior Assistant Attorney General Susan Morrill announced that 3 of the 4 Bear Brook victims had been identified as Marley's Elizabeth Honeychurch, Marie Elizabeth Vaughan, and Sarah Lynn McWaters. Family members sat in the front row, their faces showing both relief and profound sadness as they heard their loved ones' names spoken publicly for the first time in over 40 years. A family statement, read by Associate Attorney General Jeff Strelzin, captured their complex emotions. This day comes with heavy hearts. Marley's, Marie and Sarah were so loved by our families and they are greatly missed. We take solace in finally having the answers we have longed for. The identification of the 4th victim would take 6 more years of painstaking investigation. In September 2025, New Hampshire Attorney General John Formella announced that the final child had been identified as Rhea Rasmussen, confirming that she was the biological daughter of Terry Rasmussen and Pepper Reed. Detective Sergeant Christopher Elphick, who had worked on the case for years, expressed both satisfaction and sorrow at the announcement. "We never forgot Rhea. We never stopped looking. Naming her brings a sense of justice, but also reminds us of the unanswered questions that remain. The Bear Brook murders represent more than just a solved cold case. They highlight the advancement of forensic science and the power of never giving up on victims. The case was groundbreaking in its use of genetic genealogy to identify both perpetrator and victims, setting precedents that have since been used in hundreds of other investigations. It also demonstrated the valuable role that citizen investigators can play in bringing closure to families who have waited decades for answers. Yet significant questions remain unanswered. Pepper Reed, the mother of Rhea Rasmussen, has never been found, and investigators believe she too may have lost her life due to Rasmussen's actions. Detective Elphick expressed his concern that Rasmussen's trail of violence may extend even further. "I fear that he continued the pattern of killing people. He's one of the only serial offenders that killed victims he cared about, victims he loved." The search for additional victims continues, as does the investigation into Reed's disappearance. The families of Marley's Honeychurch, Marie Vaughan, Sarah McWaters, and Rhea Rasmussen finally have the answers they sought, but those answers came with immeasurable pain. They learned that their loved ones spent their final moments in fear at the hands of someone who had promised to protect them. The children never had the chance to grow up, graduate from school, or have families of their own. Their potential was stolen by a man whose capacity for evil seemed to know no bounds. Today, Bear Brook State Park serves as an unofficial memorial to these 4 victims. Visitors who know the history often pause at the area where the barrels were found, offering silent prayers for the innocent lives that were lost there. Their story serves as a reminder that behind every cold case are real people who were loved, missed, and mourned by those who cared about them. The Bear Brook murders will forever stand as a testament to the importance of never giving up on victims, no matter how much time has passed. Through the dedication of law enforcement officers, forensic scientists, genetic genealogists, and citizen investigators, 4 people who had been robbed of their identities were finally able to reclaim their names. Marley's Elizabeth Honeychurch, Marie Elizabeth Vaughan, Sarah Lynn McWaters, and Ria Rasmussen are no longer just case numbers or Jane does. They are remembered as the beloved family members they always were, whose lives mattered far more than the evil that took them away. Our hearts go out to all the families who waited so long for answers about their missing loved ones. While nothing can bring back the years of uncertainty or heal the pain of such tremendous loss, may they find some measure of peace in knowing that their cherished family members are finally home, their stories told, and their memories honored by all who have learned of their lives and their love for one another. A family vacation in the French Alps turned into a nightmare no one can explain. On a quiet September afternoon in 2012, what began as a family holiday in the beautiful French Alps turned into one of Europe's most baffling unsolved cases. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountain air near Lake Annecy, but by the time help arrived, 4 lives had been lost, and 2 young sisters would carry the trauma of that day forever. The Al-Hili family had come to France seeking the peace and beauty of the Alpine region, unaware that their journey would end in tragedy on a remote mountain road near the village of Chevaline. What happened on September 5, 2012, would puzzle investigators across 2 countries for more than a decade, leaving behind more questions than answers, and a case that continues to haunt those who knew the family. Saad Al-Hili was born in Baghdad in 1962, but his life's path had taken him far from his birthplace. He came to Britain in the 1970s, where he built a new life and career as a mechanical engineer. By 2012, he was a naturalized British citizen living in Claygate, Surrey, with his wife Iqbal and their 2 young daughters. Saad worked for Surrey Satellite Technology Limited, a company that specialized in satellite technology for emerging nations. His colleagues described him as a dedicated professional who preferred working on engineering projects without the political complications that sometimes came with defense work. Iqbal Al-Hili, 47, was a dentist who had built her own successful practice. She was known for her warm personality and devotion to her family. The couple's 2 daughters, Zainab, 7, and Zina, 4, were the center of their world. Joining them on this particular trip was Iqbal's mother, Suhaila Al-Alaf, a 74-year-old woman who had been living in Sweden. The extended family had planned what should have been a peaceful camping holiday in one of Europe's most beautiful regions. The family had initially planned to stay at one campsite, but for reasons that remain unclear, they abruptly changed their accommodation arrangements. This sudden change would later become one of many puzzling details that investigators would struggle to understand. On the morning of September 5, the family set out from their campsite for what they believed would be a pleasant drive through the mountain scenery. At approximately 3:45 p.m. Central European Summer Time, the Al-Hili family's BMW was parked in a remote lay-by on a mountain road near Chevaline. The location was secluded, surrounded by dense woodland, with only the sound of a nearby stream breaking the mountain silence. What happened next would forever change the lives of everyone connected to this family. 25 shots rang out across the quiet mountainside. The attack was swift, carried out with a Luger P06 semi-automatic pistol. The gunman showed no hesitation, firing repeatedly into the family's vehicle at close range. Saad, who had been driving, was fatally struck. Iqbal, sitting in the back seat, also lost her life, as did her elderly mother, Suhaila. The violence extended beyond the car. Sylvain Mollier, a 45-year-old French cyclist who had been in the area, became an unintended victim of the attack. He was hit multiple times at extremely close range, making him the most severely harmed of all the victims. Investigators would later theorize that Mollier may have tried to intervene or protect the family, which could explain why he was targeted so heavily by the attacker. 7-year-old Zainab Al-Hili was found stumbling along the mountain road, seriously injured from both a gunshot wound to her shoulder and blows to her head. The attacker had struck her with the weapon, leaving fragments of the grip at the scene. Despite her injuries, she somehow managed to crawl away from the vehicle. Her younger sister, 4-year-old Zina, was discovered hours later by investigators, hidden beneath her mother's body in the back seat of the BMW. She had remained silent and motionless for nearly 8 hours, traumatized but physically unharmed. The little girl had witnessed the entire attack, but was too young and too shocked to provide investigators with useful information. Brett Martin, a British former RAF pilot who lived in France, made the grim discovery while cycling through the area. He had not heard the gunshots, likely because the sound of the nearby stream masked the noise. When he came upon the scene, the first thing he noticed was a bicycle in the middle of the road, followed by the sight of young Zainab stumbling in front of her family's car. The BMW's engine was still running, and the vehicle was stuck in reverse gear with its rear wheels spinning in the loose sand. Martin faced an agonizing decision when he realized the extent of Zainab's condition. With no mobile phone reception in the remote location, he had to choose between staying with the wounded child or leaving her to seek help. He placed her in the recovery position and made the difficult choice to leave her temporarily, knowing that without medical attention, her situation would worsen. French authorities responded quickly once the alarm was raised, but the attacker had long since disappeared into the mountainous terrain. The crime scene revealed the calculated nature of the attack. Clear tire marks showed that the BMW had initially parked normally before quickly reversing and becoming stuck against the hillside. 21 bullet casings were recovered from the scene. The investigation that followed would span multiple countries and involve hundreds of investigators. More than 100 police officers from France and the United Kingdom worked on the case, interviewing approximately 800 people over the years. The international nature of the family, British citizens of Iraqi origin, with connections to Sweden through Suhaila, meant that investigators had to explore leads across multiple continents. One of the first theories investigators pursued involved Saad's work at Surrey Satellite Technology. The company had recently been acquired by European Aeronautic Defence and Space, a major defence contractor with international connections. Some speculated that Saad's access to satellite technology might have made him a target for espionage or industrial secrets. However, his colleagues disputed this theory, noting that his work focused on civilian applications rather than sensitive defense projects. Another line of inquiry focused on the family's Iraqi connections. Investigators examined whether Saad's background might have made him a target related to his family's history in Iraq. His father, Kadhim al-Hili, had fled Iraq after falling out with Saddam Hussein's regime, and some reports suggested possible connections to hidden assets. However, relatives in Baghdad strongly disputed these claims, pointing out that the family had actually been persecuted by Hussein's government. The possibility of a family dispute also emerged as a potential motive. Saad's brother Zaid was arrested in Britain in June 2013 on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder, though he was released the following day and later cleared of any involvement. French prosecutors confirmed that Zaid had denied any financial disputes with his brother. Financial pressures in Saad's life added another dimension to the investigation. Records showed that he had been experiencing money worries related to his home, though these appeared to be typical financial challenges rather than anything that would motivate such extreme violence. His last known trip to Iraq had been 2 years before the murders, when he sold the family's property in Baghdad, severing his final ties to his birth country. As the investigation progressed, authorities explored increasingly desperate theories. They examined possible connections to contract killers in Paris after discovering that one gang member possessed ammunition similar to that used in the Chevaline attack. They revisited the crime scene multiple times, most recently in 2021, searching for overlooked evidence or inconsistencies in witness accounts. The impact on the surviving children became a central concern for both investigators and child welfare services. Zainab was hospitalized in Grenoble, where she slowly recovered from her physical injuries while grappling with the psychological trauma of what she had witnessed. Zina, though physically unharmed, had experienced trauma that would affect her for years to come. Both girls were placed in the care of other family members, and given new identities to protect them from media attention. In 2020, 8 years after the attack, French authorities received permission from British courts to re-interview the sisters, who were then 15 and 12 years old. Prosecutor Véronique Denisot explained that the girls had initially been considered too traumatized to provide useful testimony, but investigators hoped that time might have helped them process their memories. The authorities were particularly interested in any new details that Zainab might remember, as she had been the only witness old enough to potentially provide useful information. Throughout the years, several arrests were made, each raising hopes for a breakthrough. In January 2022, French police arrested another suspect, but like previous detentions, this led nowhere. The man was released after providing explanations that ruled out his involvement. Each failed arrest served as a reminder of how elusive the truth remained. The case has drawn comparisons to other unsolved crimes, including the Diminisai affair, another multiple shooting that occurred in France decades earlier. Some investigators have noted similarities to random attacks by disturbed individuals, while others maintain that the targeted style of the killings suggests a more calculated motive. Local French cyclist Sylvain Mollier's presence at the scene remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Investigators have consistently stated that he had no connection to the Al-Hili family and was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, the severity of his injuries compared to the other victims has led some to speculate that he might have been the primary target. This theory suggests that the family's presence was coincidental, making them witnesses who had to be silenced. The weapon used in the attack, a Luger P06 pistol from 1906, added another layer of mystery. While this was an older model, it proved devastatingly effective in the hands of the killer. The choice of such a weapon suggested either someone with knowledge of historical firearms or someone who had acquired it through unusual channels. Over the years, the case has captured international attention, inspiring documentaries, news specials, and even plans for a television series. The combination of a British family, a French crime scene, and international connections has made it a story that resonates across borders. Yet despite all the media attention and investigative resources devoted to the case, the identity of the killer remains unknown. The crime scene itself has become a somber reminder of that terrible day. The lay-by where the attack occurred was eventually reopened to the public, but the tire marks left by the BMW's desperate attempt to escape remained visible for years. The isolation of the location continues to puzzle investigators. How did the attacker know the family would be there, and how did they escape so completely? Recent developments have focused on technological advances and new investigative techniques. In 2021, French magistrates and forensic investigators returned to the crime scene, using modern methods to re-examine evidence that might have been missed a decade earlier. However, prosecutor Line Bonnet Mathis cautioned that while they were examining inconsistencies in witness accounts and timings, no new breakthroughs had emerged. The international scope of the investigation has created unique challenges for law enforcement. Coordinating between French and British authorities, while also pursuing leads in Iraq, Sweden, and other countries, has required unprecedented cooperation. The case has tested the limits of international police work and highlighted the difficulties of solving crimes that cross multiple jurisdictions. For the extended Al-Hili family, the passage of time has brought little comfort. The two surviving sisters have grown up under the shadow of that terrible day, their childhood innocence destroyed by violence they should never have witnessed. Their guardian family members have worked to provide them with stability and normalcy, but the questions surrounding their parents' deaths continue to linger. The case has also had a profound impact on the local community around Annecy. The quiet mountain region, known for its natural beauty and peaceful atmosphere, was suddenly thrust into international headlines as the site of a shocking attack. Local residents struggled to understand how such violence could occur in their tranquil corner of France. As of 2025, more than 12 years after the attack, the case remains officially open but effectively cold. Despite the arrest of multiple suspects over the years, no charges have ever been filed. The murder weapon has never been found, and the motive remains as mysterious as ever. French authorities maintain that investigations continue, but acknowledge that progress has been minimal. The financial cost of the investigation has been enormous, involving resources from multiple countries and lasting over a decade. The human cost has been immeasurable, not just for the Al-Hili family and the family of Sylvain Mollier, but for all the investigators, witnesses, and community members who have been touched by this case. In recent years, some investigators have quietly acknowledged that the case may never be solved. The passage of time has allowed potential evidence to deteriorate, witnesses' memories to fade, and leads to grow cold. Yet the commitment to finding justice for the victims remains strong among those who continue to work on the case. The story of the Al-Hili family serves as a tragic reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed by senseless violence. Saad and Iqbal had worked hard to build a good life for their family, achieving success in their careers, and providing their children with opportunities they themselves had not had growing up. Their plans for a peaceful family holiday in the French Alps ended instead in heartbreaking tragedy. The mystery surrounding their deaths has become part of their legacy, but it should not overshadow the lives they lived. Saad was remembered by colleagues as a dedicated engineer who took pride in his work and avoided the political complications that sometimes came with defense contracting. Iqbal was known for her professional success as a dentist and her devotion to her family. Suhaila Al-Alaf had lived through decades of political upheaval in her native region, only to lose her life during what should have been a peaceful visit with her daughter's family. The two surviving sisters, now young adults, have shown remarkable resilience in rebuilding their lives after such profound trauma. While their future remains private and protected, their survival stands as a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss. They carry with them not only the memories of that terrible day, but also the love and care their parents provided during their too brief time together. The Annecy shootings case remains one of Europe's most baffling unsolved crimes, a puzzle that has defied the best efforts of international law enforcement. Perhaps someday, new evidence will emerge or someone will come forward with information that finally provides answers. Until then, the memory of Saad Al-Hili, Iqbal Al-Hili, Suhaila Al-Alaf, and Sylvain Mollier serves as a reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied, and that some mysteries may take decades to solve. Our thoughts remain with the surviving members of both families, who continue to live with the pain of their loss and the burden of unanswered questions. Their strength and dignity in the face of such tragedy deserves our respect, and our continued hope that someday they will finally have the answers they deserve. They walked into the desert. 13 years later, the truth emerged. On July 23, 1996, 4 German tourists vanished into the merciless landscape of Death Valley National Park, beginning one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of America's national parks. What started as a family vacation would end in tragedy, with their story becoming a cautionary tale about the deadly power of the desert and the thin line between adventure and disaster. Egbert Rimkus was a 34-year-old architect from Dresden, Germany, who had built a life around careful planning and precise calculations. He was a devoted father to his 11-year-old son, Georg Weber, a bright boy who carried his mother's surname from Egbert's previous marriage. Egbert had found love again with Cornelia Mayer, a 27-year-old woman who brought her own 4-year-old son, Max, into their blended family. The relationship had its complexities, as Egbert's ex-wife Heike Weber maintained custody arrangements for Georg, and there were ongoing discussions about the boy's future living arrangements. Despite these challenges, the 4 had formed a close unit, with Cornelia embracing her role as a stepmother figure and Egbert welcoming Max as his own. The family's American adventure began on July 8, 1996, when they arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport before immediately connecting to Los Angeles International Airport. At LAX, they rented a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan, the vehicle that would become central to their tragic story. Their vacation started promisingly as they explored the San Clemente area of Southern California, soaking in the coastal beauty and American culture they had traveled so far to experience. However, even in these early days, there were signs that their financial situation was becoming strained. From California, the family made their way to Las Vegas, Nevada, where they stayed at the Treasure Island Hotel and Casino. It was here that Egbert made two crucial phone calls that would later become important pieces of the puzzle surrounding their disappearance. First, he contacted his bank in Germany, requesting that $1,500 be wired to them in California to help cover their mounting travel expenses. When this amount proved insufficient, he reached out to his ex-wife Heike, asking for additional funds to extend their stay. The request was denied, leaving the family with limited resources as they planned the next phase of their journey. Despite their financial constraints, the family was determined to make the most of their remaining time in America. They had originally planned to visit Yosemite National Park and were scheduled to return their rental van to Los Angeles on July 26th, before flying back to Germany on July 27th. With time running short and money tight, they decided to take what they believed would be a scenic route through Death Valley that would allow them to see more of the American Southwest while potentially saving time and fuel. On July 22nd, 1996, the family entered Death Valley National Park through the Furnace Creek Visitors Center. Receipt records would later show that they purchased 2 copies of the Death Valley National Monument Museum text in German, suggesting they were trying to educate themselves about the park and plan their route carefully. That first night, they camped at Hanoper Canyon near Telescope Peak, following proper procedures and staying in designated areas. The family appeared to be taking reasonable precautions, understanding that Death Valley's summer temperatures could be dangerous. The next morning, July 23rd, would be their final day alive. The family visited various tourist sites throughout the park, with Cornelia dutifully signing their names in visitor logs at each stop. At one abandoned mining camp, she made an entry that would later become crucial evidence, noting that they would be headed over the pass, most likely referring to Mengel Pass. This simple note would be the last recorded evidence of their intentions and whereabouts. During their tour of the park, they also visited the geologist's cabin in Butte Valley, where they took a U.S. flag as a souvenir, an act that would later help investigators confirm their movements. What happened next can only be reconstructed from physical evidence and educated speculation. The family likely attempted to take what they thought was a shortcut toward Yosemite, driving their minivan down increasingly rough and remote roads. They may have been following the West Side Road before turning onto Warm Springs Road, which led toward Warm Spring Canyon. This wasn't truly a road, but rather a rough track that required high-clearance vehicles and experienced desert driving skills. As they pushed deeper into the remote wilderness, their situation became increasingly desperate. The minivan eventually became stranded in an area known as Anvil Canyon, east of Willow Spring, in one of the most isolated sections of Death Valley National Park. 3 of the 4 tires were badly damaged from driving over sharp rocks, leaving the vehicle unable to continue. Evidence suggested they had kept driving on the damaged wheels for more than 2 miles, desperately trying to find help or reach a main road. The sound of metal scraping against rock must have been frightening, especially with 2 young children in the vehicle. When the minivan could go no further, the family faced a terrible decision. The July heat in Death Valley was reaching 118 degrees Fahrenheit, with some areas climbing even higher. They were miles from any help, with limited water and no means of communication. The family likely realized that staying with the vehicle offered some shelter, but little hope of rescue, as they were far from any established roads or patrol routes. After careful consideration, they made the fateful choice to leave the van and attempt to walk to safety. Inside the abandoned minivan, Searchers would later find heartbreaking evidence of a family trying to prepare for survival. There was a brand new Coleman sleeping bag that had never been used, suggesting they had purchased it with the intention of camping during their journey. Children's toys were scattered throughout the interior, innocent reminders of Max's young age. Most telling was an unused tire jack and spare tire, equipment that might have helped them if they had possessed the mechanical knowledge to change a tire on such difficult terrain. The US flag from the geologist's cabin was also present, along with their German-language Death Valley guidebooks. The family's attempt to reach safety led them away from their vehicle and deeper into the unforgiving desert. They headed south, possibly believing they could reach the perimeter of Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, where they might have expected to find security patrols and assistance. This theory, later developed by search expert Tom Marhood, suggested that the Germans may have been familiar with military bases in Germany, where perimeters are typically well patrolled and fenced. However, American military installations in desert areas often have vast, unmonitored perimeters that offer no guarantee of rescue. The physical evidence suggests that at least initially, the family stayed together. Approximately 1 mile from their stranded vehicle, searchers found a beer bottle that matched those discovered in the van. Near the bottle, investigators discovered a cleared ledge with a seat mark, indicating that one of the adults, likely Egbert due to the size of the impression, had rested in the shade. This location represented a brief respite from the blazing sun, but it would not be enough to save them. As the family continued their desperate trek across the desert landscape, the extreme heat began taking its toll. Death Valley in July is one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with ground temperatures often exceeding 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Dehydration sets in quickly, followed by heat exhaustion and ultimately heat stroke. The 2 children, Max at just 4 years old and Georg at 11, would have been particularly vulnerable to these conditions. Their small bodies would have lost water more rapidly, and their shorter legs would have made the journey even more arduous. The family was reported missing when they failed to return their rental van on July 26th and missed their scheduled flight back to Germany on July 27th. Heike Weber, Egbert's ex-wife and Georg's mother, became increasingly concerned when she received no word from them. She began making inquiries with authorities, trying to track down their whereabouts and last known movements. The rental car company reported the vehicle as stolen when it wasn't returned on schedule, setting in motion the investigation that would eventually uncover the tragic truth. On October 21st, 1996, nearly 3 months after the family's disappearance, a park ranger conducting routine aerial surveillance spotted their green minivan in the remote Anvil Canyon area. The ranger was actually searching for illegal activity in the desert's isolated regions. When the vehicle was identified as belonging to the missing German tourists, it triggered one of the largest search and rescue operations in Death Valley's history. The massive search effort involved over 200 personnel and cost approximately $80,000. Search teams included over 45 active searchers at almost all times, supported by 2 helicopters providing aerial reconnaissance and 8 horses for ground mobility. Specialized groups like the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group and the Indian Wells Valley Search and Rescue Group contributed their expertise to the operation. The searchers combed the area around the stranded minivan methodically, looking for any trace of the missing family. Despite the extensive and professional search effort, the teams found almost no evidence of the family's fate. The single beer bottle discovered over a mile from the vehicle represented the only significant clue uncovered during the intensive 5-day operation. The lack of additional evidence was deeply frustrating for both the searchers and the families waiting for answers back in Germany. On October 26, 1996, authorities made the difficult decision to call off the official search. The case might have remained an unsolved mystery forever if not for the determination of amateur investigators who refused to let it rest. Tom Marhood, a search and rescue worker with Los Angeles County, had been following the case since 1996. The story had actually inspired him to train for and join a search and rescue team. Over the years, he studied the case files, developed theories about what might have happened, and planned his own search efforts. On November 11, 2009, more than 13 years after the family's disappearance, Marhood and fellow hiker Les Walker made a breakthrough discovery. Working methodically through areas that had been overlooked in the original search, they found human remains in a location approximately 8 miles from the abandoned minivan. The discovery site placed them well south of the vehicle, supporting theories that the family had attempted to walk toward what they hoped would be help. The site contained evidence of the family's final days. Cornelia's passport and bank identification were found nearby, providing immediate confirmation of the identities. A wine bottle that matched others found in their minivan was discovered at the site, along with pages from a daily planner written in German. Personal belongings and business cards from places they had visited during their American vacation were scattered around the area. Walker and Marhood immediately contacted authorities and were instructed to remain overnight to assist with the official investigation. The next day, they guided Inyo County Sheriff's Office investigators, FBI agents, and search and rescue personnel to the site via helicopter. The remote location required significant effort to access, highlighting just how far the family had traveled from their stranded vehicle in their desperate attempt to find help. DNA analysis later confirmed that the male remains belonged to Egbert Rimkus, while DNA could not be recovered from the female remains due to deterioration from years of desert exposure. Investigators were confident they belonged to Cornelia Mayer based on the identification documents and personal belongings found nearby. The discovery provided long-awaited answers for the families in Germany who had spent over a decade wondering about their loved one's fate. The question of what happened to the 2 children remained partially unresolved. In December 2010, additional searches of the area uncovered what appeared to be children's shoes and small bone fragments. However, these remains were too deteriorated for DNA extraction. While investigators believed the items belonged to Max and Jorg, official identification was never completed. The children's belongings were reportedly found in a location separate from the adults, suggesting the family may have become separated during their final ordeal. The physical evidence painted a tragic picture of a family's final days. The Germans had likely succumbed to extreme heat and lack of water while attempting their desperate walk across the desert. The average high temperature in Death Valley during July is 116, 5 degrees Fahrenheit, creating conditions that can be fatal within hours for those without adequate water and shelter. The family's decision to leave their vehicle, while understandable given their isolation, had sealed their fate. The Death Valley Germans' case became a sobering reminder of the desert's deadly power and the importance of proper preparation for wilderness travel. The family had made several decisions based on their European experience that proved inappropriate for the American Southwest. Their assumption that military installations would have well-patrolled perimeters reflected their familiarity with German military bases, not the reality of remote American facilities. Their choice of route through Death Valley, while potentially scenic, required local knowledge and proper equipment they did not possess. The tragedy also highlighted the challenges of search and rescue operations in vast, remote wilderness areas. Despite professional, well-funded search efforts involving hundreds of personnel, the family's remains went undiscovered for 13 years. It was only through the persistent efforts of dedicated volunteers like Tom Marhood and Les Walker that closure was finally achieved. Their work demonstrated the value of citizen investigators who bring fresh perspectives to cold cases. For the families left behind in Dresden, Germany, the discovery of the remains brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief. Ursula Rimkus, Egbert's mother and Jorg's grandmother, had spent years refusing to give up hope that they might somehow still be alive. The Mayer family had gone through legal procedures to declare Cornelia and Max dead, but without physical proof, questions had inevitably lingered. The confirmation of their deaths, while painful, allowed the healing process to finally begin. The story of the Death Valley Germans serves as a powerful reminder that nature's beauty often comes with hidden dangers. Death Valley's stark landscape and extreme temperatures create an environment where small mistakes can have fatal consequences. The family's tragedy was not the result of recklessness or poor judgment, but rather a series of understandable decisions that proved incompatible with the desert's unforgiving nature. Their memory lives on as a cautionary tale for all who venture into America's wilderness areas, reminding us to respect the power of the natural world and prepare accordingly for its challenges. Egbert, Cornelia, Georg, and Max lost their lives far from home, in a land they had come to explore and appreciate. Their story reminds us that behind every missing person's case are real families, real dreams, and real love that transcends even the most tragic circumstances. May their memory serve as both a warning and a tribute to the adventurous spirit that drives us to explore the world, while never forgetting the importance of respecting the forces that shape it. Three women, one man, and a secret that took half a century to uncover. On October 28, 1962, Mary Horton Vale lost her life due to the actions of her husband, William Felix Vale, on Louisiana's Calcasieu River. What began as a suspicious drowning would become one of America's oldest prosecuted serial killer cases, taking over 50 years to reach justice. Mary Elizabeth Horton married Felix Vale in July 1961, when she was just 21 years old. The young woman from Louisiana had no way of knowing that her new husband would become the subject of a decades-long investigation. Mary gave birth to their son, William Billy Felix Vale Jr., in early 1962, bringing joy to what seemed like a promising marriage. However, family members later testified that Mary had confided she believed her marriage was a mistake and wanted to leave Felix. She was also pregnant with their second child at the time of her passing. Felix Vale came from a dairy farming family in Montpelier, Mississippi. Those who knew him described a man who seemed charming on the surface but harbored darker tendencies underneath. His relationship with Mary had grown troubled in the months before her passing, with witnesses later testifying about problems between the couple. Isaac Shire, who had housed Felix before his marriage, noted that Felix was unhappy about having a child and that Mary was upset with him the day before she lost her life, reportedly due to another woman. The insurance policies Felix had taken out on Mary raised immediate suspicions among investigators. In June 1962, just months before Mary's passing, Felix purchased a $50,000 accidental life insurance policy on his wife through Travelers Insurance Company. This was in addition to an existing $8,000 double indemnity policy through Allstate Insurance. The substantial coverage seemed unusual for a young couple with modest means, especially since Felix was behind on most of his major financial obligations, yet managed to pay the entire annual premium. On the evening of October 28, 1962, Felix claimed he and Mary went out on the Calcasieu River in his small boat to check trot lines for night fishing. According to Felix's account, Mary accidentally fell overboard when the boat swerved, and despite his efforts, he could not rescue her. However, investigators found numerous inconsistencies in his story that would haunt the case for decades. When law enforcement examined Felix's boat, they discovered the trot line still coiled in his tackle box, contradicting his claim that they had been setting or checking lines. The section of river where Mary allegedly fell was deemed unsuitable for trot lines, and no fishing lines were ever found in the water. Additionally, Mary was known to have a great fear of dark water and could not swim well, making it unlikely she would sit on the backrest of a boat seat without a life preserver. Perhaps most troubling were the circumstances surrounding Mary's body when it was recovered 2 days later on October 30, 1962. Isaac Shire, who helped search for Mary, testified that when her remains were pulled from the water, her position appeared unnatural and concerning. A dark-colored scarf was found tied around her neck and across her mouth. This conflicted with what investigators usually see in drowning cases, where victims tend to be discovered in a different position. Dr. Terry Welk, the Calcasieu Parish coroner, who later reviewed the case as a forensic pathologist, determined that Mary was likely no longer alive before entering the water. The original 1962 autopsy, performed by Dr. Avery Cook, who was not a forensic pathologist, had listed drowning as the cause of death. However, Dr. Welk noted that Mary's body showed details inconsistent with drowning, including unusual patterns on her skin and dark stains on her white sweatshirt that appeared to be petroleum-based rather than river mud. The autopsy report also revealed a significant bruise on the side of Mary's head, suggesting she may have suffered head trauma before entering the water. Combined with the scarf around her neck and mouth, Dr. Welk concluded that Mary had been harmed prior to being placed in the water. He stated with full certainty that the manner of death was homicide, not accidental drowning. Felix was initially arrested on November 4, 1962, after investigators found numerous discrepancies in his statements. During interrogation, deputies questioned him about his suspicious behavior, including why he passed lighted tugboats and all-night businesses along the river without seeking help, and why he had recently purchased such a large insurance policy on Mary. Felix refused to take a polygraph examination and was released after several days when the original coroner ruled Mary's death accidental. The case was presented to a grand jury, but was ultimately dismissed due to lack of evidence. After Mary's passing, Felix collected on the insurance policies, but notably never paid for Mary's funeral expenses, leaving her family to cover the costs. His behavior during this period struck many as inappropriate for a grieving widower. Mary's sorority sister, Judy Turney, who drove Felix to the funeral, described him as very flippant and not in mourning at all. Following Mary's passing, Felix moved to California with young Billy, but his troubles were far from over. In 1970, 8-year-old Billy walked into a California police station with a troubling story. The child told authorities that his father was forcing him to use substances and that he had overheard Felix tell his girlfriend, Sharon Hensley, that he had ended Mary's life. This led to Felix's arrest on charges related to controlled substances and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, while Billy was placed with his maternal family in Mississippi. Sharon Hensley, originally from Bismarck, North Dakota, had become involved with Felix in the late 1960s. The young woman, described as troubled and possibly under Felix's control, disappeared in February 1973 after making one final phone call to her family. Felix claimed he last saw Sharon in Key West, Florida, where she allegedly joined an Australian couple on their boat to sail around the world. However, the details of his story changed over time, with Felix initially claiming the couple's names were John and Vanessa, then later saying they were Frank and Sally. Sharon's case would remain unsolved, but Felix's pattern of relationships ending in tragedy continued. In the early 1980s, Felix met 15-year-old Annette Craver at a yard sale in Houston, Texas. Despite the significant age difference, the two began a relationship that would culminate in marriage when Annette turned 17 in August 1983. The young woman, described as adventurous and creative, had inherited property from her father's life insurance settlement. Annette's relationship with Felix quickly isolated her from her mother, Mary Rose Craver. Felix convinced Annette to add him to the deed of her inherited property, and eventually she transferred complete ownership to him. In September 1984, just over a year after their marriage, Annette and Felix left their home in Tulsa, Oklahoma, ostensibly for a vacation. Felix returned alone in October, claiming that Annette had decided she needed freedom and had taken a bus to Mexico with $50,000. Mary Rose Craver immediately suspected something was wrong and reported her daughter missing on October 22, 1984. When she investigated Annette's former residence, she found it stripped of all her daughter's belongings. Felix filed for divorce shortly after, claiming he could not locate his wife. Like Sharon Hensley, Annette Craver was never seen again. The cases remained cold for decades until investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell of the Clarion Ledger began examining Felix's past in the 2000s. Mitchell's reporting connected the families of the three women and brought renewed attention to their cases. Mary Rose Craver had been searching for answers about her daughter's disappearance and discovered the connection between Felix and the other missing women. Her determination to find justice for Annette helped fuel the investigation that would eventually lead to Felix's prosecution. Private investigator Gina Frenzel also played a crucial role in building the case against Felix. In 2013, after reading Mitchell's reporting, she made contact with Felix and gained access to his personal journals when he was arrested. The journals contained troubling entries, including references to destroying documents from earlier years and letters that seemed to provide false explanations for Sharon Hensley's disappearance. One journal entry from 2003 suggested Felix had burned papers and journals from his past, potentially destroying evidence. The breakthrough came when additional witnesses came forward with incriminating statements Felix had made over the years. Wesley Turnage, who had known Felix since childhood in Mississippi, testified that during a car ride to work in the 1960s, Felix had angrily stated about Mary, "I didn't want the child I had, and I didn't want another one, and I made sure she wouldn't have any more." Turnage had promised himself he would report these remarks if the case ever came up again. Robert Fremont, who had taken trips with Felix in California during the late 1960s, testified that Felix had confessed to ending Mary's life during their travels. Fremont recalled Felix mentioning hurting his wife during an argument on the water. Bruce Bedibar, another California acquaintance, testified that Felix had told him multiple times that he had ended his wife's life, though Bedibar initially thought Felix felt responsible because he couldn't rescue her. On June 27, 2013, more than 50 years after Mary's demise, a grand jury finally indicted Felix for second-degree murder in her case. The trial began on August 8, 2016, with Felix, now 76 years old, facing life in prison. Prosecutor Hugo Holland argued that Felix was either the most unlucky human being who has lived since Job, or he's a killer that learned from his mistakes. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case built on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the suspicious pattern of women disappearing from Felix's life. Dr. Michael Barden, the renowned forensic pathologist who had testified in the O.J. Simpson trial, was brought in to support the prosecution's case. The evidence regarding Sharon Hensley and Annette Craver was allowed under the doctrine of chances, demonstrating a pattern of behavior rather than coincidence. Defense attorney Andrew Casanave argued that Mary's demise was accidental, calling only one witness during the trial. Their closing arguments lasted less than 15 minutes compared to the prosecution's roughly 40 minutes. The defense maintained that the evidence was entirely circumstantial and failed to exclude every reasonable hypothesis of innocence. On August 12, 2016, after deliberating for just 33 minutes, the jury unanimously found William Felix Vail guilty of second-degree murder in Mary's case. The swift verdict reflected the strength of the prosecution's case and the jury's conviction that justice had finally been served. The courtroom was filled with family members of all three women who had waited decades for this moment. Judge Robert Lane Wyatt sentenced Felix to life in prison without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence on September 26, 2016. At 76 years old, Felix became recognized as America's oldest suspected serial killer to be prosecuted. Mary's brother, Will Horton, spoke to the media after sentencing, expressing relief that justice had finally been achieved for his sister. Felix's defense team filed appeals challenging both his conviction and sentence, arguing that the 54-year delay in prosecution had violated his rights to a fair trial. However, on December 28, 2017, the Louisiana Third Circuit Court of Appeal affirmed both the conviction and sentence with written reasons. The Louisiana Supreme Court subsequently declined, to hear further appeals. The cases of Sharon Hensley and Annette Craver remain officially unsolved, though both women are presumed deceased. Their families continue to search for answers and closure, hoping that Felix's conviction in Mary's case might eventually lead to resolution in their loved ones' disappearances. The investigation into these cases continues, with law enforcement agencies maintaining active files on both women. Felix's son Billy, who had bravely come forward as a child to report his father's confession, passed away from cancer in 2009, several years before seeing justice served in his mother's case. His childhood testimony and the courage he showed in speaking out against his father played a crucial role in keeping the case alive and ultimately bringing Felix to justice. The William Felix Vale case stands as a testament to the persistence of law enforcement, investigative journalism, and grieving families who refused to let these cases fade into obscurity. The collaboration between Mary Rose Craver, reporter Jerry Mitchell, private investigator Gina Frenzel, and law enforcement agencies across multiple states demonstrated how cold cases can be revived through determination and modern investigative techniques. Mary Elizabeth Horton Vale was only 22 years old when she lost her life, with her entire future ahead of her. Her memory lives on through the family members who fought tirelessly for justice and through the legal precedent her case established for prosecuting decades-old crimes. The conviction of William Felix Vale ensures that Mary's story will not be forgotten and that her life, though tragically cut short, ultimately served to protect other potential victims and bring closure to those who loved her. A missing girl, a mysterious letter, and a hammer at the bottom of a pond. The Keddy cabin mystery will haunt you. On the morning of April 12, 1981, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp returned home from a sleepover to discover a scene that would haunt her forever and become one of America's most chilling unsolved crimes. Glenna Sue Sharp had fought to build a new life for her children after leaving an allegedly abusive marriage to James Sharp in 1979. Sue, just 36 years old, had brought her 5 children from their home in Connecticut all the way to Northern California, seeking a fresh start in the small mountain community of Keddy. She was a stay-at-home mother who had been married to a military man, but their relationship had deteriorated to the point where she felt she had no choice but to leave. The family first lived in a small mobile home in the Claremont Trailer Park before moving to the larger cabin 28 at the Keddy Resort in November 1979. James Sharp visited the family once in 1979, but never returned, leaving Sue to raise their children without any financial support from their father. Life was a daily struggle for Sue and her children. Her income consisted of just $250 from the Navy, food stamps, and wages from a part-time job at the Quincy Elks Lodge. To better their situation, she enrolled in a California Education Training Act program that provided a small stipend and allowed her to take typing classes at Feather River College. The family of 6 lived together in cabin 28, though 15-year-old John had moved into a makeshift bedroom in the basement that could only be accessed from outside. The doors were kept unlocked, so John could reach the upstairs bathroom, a detail that would later prove significant. Sue shared one bedroom with her daughters, 14-year-old Sheila and 12-year-old Tina, while 10-year-old Rick and 5-year-old Greg shared the other bedroom. Despite their modest circumstances, the Sharp family had begun to find their place in the tight-knit community of Keddy. The mountain resort town was small, wedged between Spanish Creek and the railroad line, with a hotel, bar, restaurant, general store, and post office serving both year-round residents and seasonal visitors. Sue was described as someone who kept to herself, but she had developed relationships within the community, including attending the same typing class as Marty Smart and his wife Marilyn. The Smarts lived in nearby cabin 26, just across a narrow street called Spanish Oaks Lane, making them close neighbors to the Sharp family. The events leading to that tragic April morning began the night before. On April 11, 1981, Sheila had decided to spend the night at a friend's house with the Seabolt family in cabin 27, right next door to her own home. John and his 17-year-old friend, Dana Wingate, had hitchhiked to the nearby town of Quincy for a party and returned to cabin 28 later that evening. 12-year-old Tina had briefly joined her sister at the neighbors before returning home to be with her mother and younger brothers. Also staying in the cabin that night was 12-year-old Justin Smart, the son of their neighbor Martin Smart. When Sheila returned home around 10 o'clock the next morning, she opened the door to a scene of devastation. The living room showed clear evidence of a violent struggle. Her mother Sue, her brother John, and his friend Dana had all been killed sometime during the night. Deputy Hank Clement was the first officer to arrive on the scene and reported finding signs of disturbance everywhere. On the walls, furniture, ceiling, doors, and even on the back steps. The three youngest boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin Smart, were found unharmed in an adjacent bedroom, somehow having slept through the events that unfolded just feet away. The details investigators uncovered painted a picture of deliberate cruelty. All three victims had been restrained with tape and electrical cords. Sue was found lying near the living room sofa, having suffered severe injuries. She had been gagged with cloth and tape and bore a mark on her head consistent with the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. John was discovered near the front door with his hands bound. Dana had also been tied and had suffered serious head trauma. Both boys had their ankles secured with electrical wire. 2 damaged knives and a hammer were recovered at the scene, along with indications that the victims had been moved after the incident. The cabin's telephone had been left off the hook, all lights turned off, and the drapes drawn. Most alarming of all, 12-year-old Tina Sharp was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until hours later that investigators realized a 4th family member was missing. When the FBI was called in due to the suspected abduction, the case began to reveal its complexities. The home showed no signs of forced entry, though an unidentified fingerprint was recovered from a handrail on the back stairs. A couple staying in the neighboring cabin reported hearing muffled screams around 1:30 a.m., but were unable to determine their source and had returned to sleep. Initially, the 3 surviving boys claimed to have slept through the entire incident. However, Justin Smart later provided crucial testimony, stating that he had seen Sue with 2 men in the house that night. One man reportedly had a mustache and long hair, while the other was clean-shaven with short hair, but both wore glasses and one carried a hammer. According to Justin, John and Dana had entered the home and argued with these men, resulting in the confrontation. He also claimed that Tina was taken out through the cabin's back door by one of the intruders. The investigation quickly focused on 2 primary suspects, Martin Smart and his house guest, John Bo Baubed. Smart, who was Justin's stepfather, lived with his wife Marilyn and her 2 sons in cabin 26. Baubed, an ex-convict with known connections to organized crime in Chicago, had been staying with the Smart family for just 10 days before the incidents occurred. Both men had been seen behaving oddly at the local bar the night before, dressed in suits and ties. The relationship between the Sharp and Smart families was more complicated than it initially appeared. Martin Smart was known as a possessive and jealous man who had a troubled relationship with his wife Marilyn. According to investigators, Smart and Sue Sharp had been involved in a relationship, while Sue was allegedly counseling Marilyn about leaving her controlling husband. This created what investigators described as a complicated triangle that may have provided the motive for the attacks. Smart had recently lost his job as a cook at the hotel restaurant and was reportedly supporting his family by selling substances and making hashish. During questioning, Martin Smart made several suspicious statements. He told investigators that he had owned a hammer matching the description of one found at the scene, but claimed it had gone missing around the time of the incidents. He also made the odd comment that whoever took his hammer would have been wiser to take his hatchet instead. When discussing the possibility that his stepson Justin might have witnessed something, Smart said, "He is quiet enough to where he could have noticed something without me detecting him," language that suggested he had been awake and present during the events rather than sleeping as he claimed. The investigation was plagued with problems from the beginning. Sheriff Doug Thomas, who was in charge at the time, made the unusual decision to contact the Sacramento Department of Justice, which sent 2 special agents from their organized crime unit rather than from homicide. This decision struck many as odd, but it made sense when considering Bo Balbed's connections to organized crime in Chicago. The agents who arrived collected potential evidence, but because DNA testing was not yet available, little useful information was obtained from the scene. 3 months into the investigation, Sheriff Thomas resigned and took a job with the Sacramento Department of Justice, abandoning the case when it was still active. His handling of the investigation would later be described as disastrous at best and corrupt at worst. Both Martin Smart and Bo Balbed were allowed to leave Plumas County and relocate to Oregon after brief questioning. According to some accounts, the suspects were actually told to leave town. The search for Tina Sharp continued for 3 long years. On April 1984, exactly 3 years after her disappearance, a man searching for bottles discovered a small section of human remains in Camp 18, near Feather Falls in Butte County, about 62 miles from Keddy. The remains were later confirmed to be those of 12-year-old Tina Sharp. Near her remains, investigators found a child's blanket, a blue nylon jacket, a pair of jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty surgical tape dispenser. The Butte County Sheriff's Department received an anonymous phone call asking if they had considered connecting the remains to the case-up in Keddy in Plumas County a couple years ago, where a 12-year-old girl was never found. The case remained cold for decades until new investigators took over in 2013. Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg reopened the case and began uncovering evidence that had been overlooked or ignored. Among their discoveries was a sealed tape recording of the anonymous tip about Tina's remains, which had been found in case files but never investigated. In 2016, the investigation took a significant turn when Gamberg recovered a hammer from a dried-up pond near the resort entrance. The hammer matched the physical description of the one Martin Smart claimed had gone missing. A metal detector enthusiast who had been searching for a lost wedding ring discovered the weapon and contacted investigators. The pond would have been a logical place for someone fleeing the scene to dispose of evidence, yet it appeared no one had searched it during the original investigation. Perhaps most damaging was a handwritten letter that Martin Smart had sent to his wife Marilyn just weeks after the incidents occurred. Written on flowery yellow stationery, the letter was a plea for his wife to return to him. In it, Smart wrote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" Marilyn had provided this letter to the sheriff's office at some point, but it was never treated as evidence or followed up on during the original investigation. The investigation also uncovered testimony from a counselor at the Reno Veterans Administration who claimed that in May 1981, Martin Smart had confessed to the crimes. According to the counselor, Smart had said, "I lost Sue and Tina due to my actions, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys." When the Department of Justice was alerted to this confession in 1981, they reportedly dismissed it as hearsay. Marilyn Smart had left her husband on April 12, 1981, the same day the bodies were discovered, and moved out of cabin 26. In a 2008 documentary, she admitted that she believed her husband and Bo Balbed were responsible for what happened to the Sharp family. However, Sheriff Doug Thomas contradicted this by stating that Martin had successfully passed a polygraph test, though it was later revealed that Thomas and Martin had a close relationship. The case took on additional complexity when investigators began exploring connections to a larger criminal network. Martin Smart was known to be involved in substance distribution, and Bo Balbed had connections to Chicago crime syndicates with financial interests in the same activities. Some investigators believe this might explain why the Sacramento Department of Justice sent organized crime agents instead of homicide detectives, and why the two main suspects were allowed to leave town so easily. Both Martin Smart and John Balbed have since passed away, Balbed in 1988 and Smart in 2000, but the case remains active. In 2018, investigators announced that DNA evidence recovered from tape at the crime scene had matched that of a known living suspect. Current investigators believe that more than 2 people were involved in the crimes, and that several individuals who played roles in the events or the cover-up are still alive. The Keddy Resort Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004, removing the physical reminder of that terrible night. But for Sheila Sharp and the surviving family members, the search for justice continues more than 4 decades later. The case represents not just an unsolved crime, but a failure of the justice system that allowed evidence to be overlooked, suspects to escape scrutiny, and a family to suffer without answers for decades. Today, investigators continue to follow new leads and examine evidence with modern forensic techniques that weren't available in 1981. The hammer recovered from the pond, the knife found near the general store, and DNA evidence are all being analyzed in hopes of finally bringing closure to this case. Sheriff Hagwood and investigator Gamberg remain optimistic that the truth will eventually emerge, though they acknowledge that solving a case this old presents unique challenges. The Keddy Cabin case stands as a reminder of how a single night of violence can shatter multiple families and an entire community. Sue Sharp, who had worked so hard to build a safe life for her children after escaping a difficult marriage, lost her life along with 2 of her children in a way that horrified the small town. Her surviving children have lived with the trauma and uncertainty for over 40 years, never knowing exactly what happened that night or why their family was targeted. The case continues to haunt all those who knew the Sharp family and serves as a testament to the importance of thorough police work and the pursuit of justice, no matter how much time has passed. She was setting up a garage sale. What happened next was purely calculated. On a quiet Friday morning in Tomball, Texas, Elizabeth Barraza had no idea she was living her final hours. She woke early, excited about the garage sale. She was organizing to raise money for her upcoming 5th wedding anniversary trip with her husband Sergio. The 29-year-old had carefully planned every detail, even packing Harry Potter-themed luggage and custom shoes for their planned visit to the wizarding world of Harry Potter at Universal Studios. What should have been a day of preparation for celebration would instead become one of the most puzzling unsolved cases in Harris County history. Elizabeth Newell Barraza was born into a loving family, the daughter of Bob and Rosemary Newell. She grew up with a generous heart and an infectious smile that could light up any room. Her friends and family described her as someone who lived to bring joy to others, particularly through her deep love of Star Wars and Harry Potter. Elizabeth found her perfect match in Sergio Barraza, a man who shared her passion for the galaxy far, far away. The couple married on February 1, 2014, building a life together centered around their shared interests and commitment to helping others. Their relationship blossomed through their mutual involvement in the 501st Legion, a Star Wars charity organization where members dress as characters from the films to visit children in hospitals and raise money for various causes. Elizabeth and Sergio would spend countless hours perfecting their costumes and bringing smiles to young faces, embodying the very spirit of service that defined Elizabeth's character. She worked as a data analyst for the Rosen Group, a company that inspects oil and gas pipelines, where her colleagues described her as dependable and kind. Her job involved taking data from pipeline inspection robots and turning it into reports, straightforward work that gave investigators no reason to believe her profession could have made her a target. The Barrazas lived quietly in the 8600 block of Cedar Walk Drive in Tomball, a peaceful suburban neighborhood where neighbors knew each other and children played safely in their yards. Their home was equipped with a Ring doorbell camera, a detail that would later prove crucial to the investigation. Elizabeth loved their life together and as their 5th wedding anniversary approached, she was filled with excitement about their planned trip to Orlando. To help fund their anniversary celebration, she decided to organize a garage sale, carefully selecting items they no longer needed and preparing to spend her Friday morning in the driveway. January 25, 2019, began like any other workday for the Barraza household. At approximately 8 a.m., Elizabeth left home to visit Starbucks, returning with her morning coffee to begin setting up for the garage sale. The surveillance footage from their own doorbell camera would later show her moving back and forth, arranging tables and items in preparation for the day ahead. She had placed a cash box containing $100 in change near the garage sale items, ready to help customers who might arrive early. Everything seemed perfectly normal as she went about her morning routine. At 6:48 a.m., Sergio left for work as he did every weekday, driving away from their home with no indication that anything was amiss. Elizabeth continued her preparations alone, unaware that a dark-colored Nissan Frontier pickup truck had been circling their neighborhood since approximately 2 a.m. that morning. The vehicle had been caught on various neighborhood surveillance cameras, suggesting that whoever was driving had been watching and planning for hours. At 6:48 a.m., just as Sergio was leaving for work, the truck entered their neighborhood again, taking a specific route that would bring it directly past the Barraza home. At exactly 6:52 a.m., the unthinkable happened. The surveillance footage shows a person emerge from the Nissan Frontier and walk directly toward Elizabeth, who was standing in her driveway near the garage sale items. The individual appeared to be small in stature, with long hair or possibly wearing a wig, and investigators later described the suspect as possibly female. As the person approached, Elizabeth seemed to recognize them, or at least acknowledge their presence, suggesting there may have been a brief conversation. What happened next was captured by multiple surveillance cameras. The suspect pulled out a revolver and fired at Elizabeth several times at close range. Enhanced audio from the incident suggests the shooter may have said, "Good morning," before opening fire. Elizabeth was hit multiple times, and after the final shot, the shooter quickly ran back to the waiting pickup truck. The entire attack lasted only seconds, but it was clear this was not a random act. The shooter's choice of weapon was particularly telling to investigators. By using a revolver instead of a semi-automatic pistol, the perpetrator ensured that no shell casings would be left behind as evidence. This detail, combined with the apparent disguise and the hours of surveillance beforehand, convinced detectives that Elizabeth's death was carefully planned and executed. The fact that nothing was stolen from the garage sale or the home further supported the theory that this was a targeted act rather than a robbery gone wrong. After fleeing, the suspect drove away in the Nissan Frontier, but surveillance cameras captured something even more unsettling. The vehicle initially left the neighborhood through the main entrance, but then made a U-turn and drove back past the Barraza home around 6:55 a.m., just minutes after the attack. This behavior suggested the shooter wanted to see the aftermath or confirm what had happened. The truck then left the neighborhood permanently through a different route, using a greenbelt path that led to the main road. At 7:19 a.m., the garage door alarm at the Barraza home was triggered, sending notifications to both Sergio and Elizabeth's parents. Sergio, who was already at work, checked his phone and saw the alert. When he accessed the doorbell camera footage, he saw the devastating attack that had claimed his wife's life. He immediately called for help while racing back home, his world shattered by what he had seen. Elizabeth's parents, Bob and Rosemary Newell, also received the alarm notification and rushed to their daughter's home. Emergency responders arrived at the scene by 6:58 a.m., finding Elizabeth gravely injured in her driveway. The first officers on scene were from Harris County Precinct 4, followed quickly by Harris County Sheriff's Office deputies. Elizabeth was still alive when paramedics reached her, and Memorial Hermann Life Flight was called to transport her to the hospital. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, Elizabeth's injuries could not be overcome. After spending several hours in critical care, She was pronounced dead at 1:40 p.m. Even in death, Elizabeth's generous spirit continued to help others. As a registered organ donor, her organs saved 4 lives that day, and her tissue donation restored sight to another person. Her final act of service was emblematic of the way she had lived her entire life, always thinking of others before herself. For her family, this small comfort would be one of the few bright spots in the darkest day of their lives. The investigation into Elizabeth's death began immediately, with the Harris County Sheriff's Office taking the lead. Sergeant Mike Ritchie of the Homicide Division was assigned to the case and has remained dedicated to solving it ever since. The abundance of surveillance footage initially gave investigators hope that they would quickly identify the suspect, but years have passed without an arrest. The FBI and Texas Rangers have joined the investigation, lending their expertise to what has become one of the county's most perplexing cold cases. Detectives quickly ruled out robbery as a motive, noting that the $100 in the cash box was left untouched and nothing was taken from the home. They began looking at Elizabeth's personal relationships, her work connections, and her involvement with the 501st Legion. Her colleagues at the Rosen Group were cleared after investigators determined that none of them could have been at the scene during the time of the shooting. Her work duties were deemed too routine to have made her a target, involving simple data analysis with no access to sensitive information. The investigation naturally focused on those closest to Elizabeth, including her husband Sergio. As is standard in such cases, Sergio became a person of interest, but his cooperation with investigators has been complete and ongoing. Sergeant Ritchie has publicly stated that Sergio has been nothing but compliant with the investigation, and that no evidence has been found linking him to his wife's death. The fact that Sergio was at work when the shooting occurred, combined with surveillance footage showing him leaving home earlier, has largely cleared him in the eyes of investigators. One area that has received significant attention is the couple's involvement with the 501st Legion. Investigators have looked into whether conflicts within the Star Wars costuming community could have led to Elizabeth's death, but no substantial leads have emerged from this avenue. The organization is known for its charitable work and positive community involvement, making it an unlikely source of deadly conflict. However, detectives have not completely ruled out the possibility that someone from this community or related activities could have been involved. Financial motives have also been explored, particularly regarding life insurance. Investigators noted that Elizabeth had a life insurance policy, but Sergio has not attempted to collect on it, which Sergeant Ritchie sees as significant. If it's not her husband, we all know there was life insurance involved, which is still not being paid. Sergio has not asked for that, Ritchie explained. This has led investigators to consider who else might have benefited from Elizabeth's death, though no clear answers have emerged. The case has garnered significant media attention over the years, with numerous television programs and podcasts covering the story. Elizabeth's parents, Bob and Rosemary Newell, have been vocal advocates for their daughter, maintaining a website called Who Killed Liz Barraza.com to keep the case in the public eye. The site features a counter showing the number of days that have passed without justice, currently over 2,300 days. They believe their daughter was the victim of a murder-for-hire plot, though they have no evidence to support this theory beyond the professional nature of the killing. No, it's not a random thing, Bob Newell told reporters. The person who shot her, we believe, was paid to do it. That makes the case ever so much difficult to deal with because we have maybe 2 parties, and we don't currently have the names or addresses of either of them. His conviction that Elizabeth was targeted by a hired killer has remained unwavering, though investigators have not confirmed this theory. The family's pain has been compounded by the lack of progress in the case. Grief comes in waves, said Bob Newell. Sometimes it's little waves that come at your feet, and sometimes it's a tsunami. His wife Rosemary added, anything and everything will kind of jump out at you, and you will feel that pain. The couple continues to live with the daily reminder that their daughter's killer remains free, unable to find closure or peace. Crime Stoppers of Houston has offered substantial rewards for information leading to an arrest in the case. The reward has grown over the years, currently standing at $50,000 for information leading to the charging or arrest of the suspect. Despite the significant financial incentive and extensive media coverage, no tips have led to an arrest. The lack of progress has been frustrating for everyone involved, from the family to the investigators working tirelessly on the case. In January 2025, nearly 6 years after Elizabeth's death, her family gathered at Burroughs Park in Tomball for the dedication of a memorial bench in her honor. The ceremony was attended by friends, family members, and community supporters who wanted to remember Elizabeth's life and legacy. Our beautiful daughter, Liz Newell Barraza, has a tree dedicated to her in Burroughs Park, her parents said. Her tree is in a place of peace and beauty in a park that we frequented when Liz was alive. It gives her friends and family a special place where we can go when we need to feel her presence. The memorial serves as a testament to the impact Elizabeth had on those around her during her 29 years of life. She is remembered not as a victim, but as a woman who brought joy to others through her costumes and charity work, who loved her husband deeply, and who faced each day with kindness and generosity. Her parents continue to honor her memory by fighting for justice and working to keep her case in the public consciousness. As of 2025, the case remains active with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Sergeant Ritchie continues to pursue new leads and has stated that investigators are looking at various possibilities, including who might have benefited from Elizabeth's death. The abundance of surveillance footage continues to be both a blessing and a curse for investigators. While it clearly shows the crime being committed, the suspect's disguise and careful planning have prevented identification. The case has highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement when dealing with what appears to be a professional killing. The shooter's use of a revolver, the disguise, the advanced surveillance, and the targeted nature of the attack all suggest someone with knowledge of how to avoid detection. Whether this was a murder for hire, as Elizabeth's parents believe, or the work of someone with a personal grudge against her, remains unknown. What is certain is that Elizabeth Barraza was loved by many and deserved far more than the 29 years she was given. Her passing has left an irreparable hole in the lives of her husband, parents, extended family, and friends. The case serves as a reminder that violence can strike anywhere, even in the safest neighborhoods and against the most innocent victims. Until her killer is brought to justice, Elizabeth's family will continue their fight for answers, refusing to let her memory fade or her case be forgotten. The investigation continues, with authorities asking anyone with information about Elizabeth Barraza's death to contact Crime Stoppers of Houston. Somewhere, someone knows who was responsible for this calculated act. Elizabeth's family and the investigators working her case remain hopeful that justice will eventually be served, and that the person who took such a bright light from the world will be held accountable for their actions. Elizabeth Barraza's story is one of a life cut tragically short, but also one of lasting impact and enduring love. Her memory lives on in the hearts of those who knew her, in the charitable work she supported, and in the continued fight for justice that bears her name. May her family find the peace and closure they so desperately seek, and may Elizabeth's legacy continue to inspire acts of kindness and generosity in a world that could use more of both. She studied abroad in Italy, but what happened inside her locked room shocked the world. A young woman's dreams of studying abroad ended in a tragedy that would captivate the world and expose deep flaws in the pursuit of justice. Meredith Susanna Cara Kircher was born on December 28, 1985, in London to parents John and Arlene Kircher. Her father John was a respected British journalist who wrote over 40 children's books, while her mother Arlene was born in Pakistan and later became a British citizen. The couple divorced when Meredith and her 3 siblings were young, and Arlene raised the 4 children in their modest family home in Calston, a suburb in the southern outer reaches of London. Meredith was the youngest of the 4 children, with older brothers John and Lyle and sister Stephanie. Growing up, Meredith was described by friends and family as sociable, loving, and determined. She attended the prestigious Old Palace School in nearby Croydon, a private institution costing around £10,000 per year. Those who knew her said she was popular, charismatic, and had a strong drive for self-improvement. Before university, she worked various jobs, including as a waitress and tour guide, and even appeared in a music video for British singer Christian Leontine in 2004. Her father John later described how determined she was to study abroad, saying she fought hard to get to Italy despite several setbacks. At 21, Meredith was studying European studies at the University of Leeds when she decided to pursue her dream of becoming a journalist or working for the European Union. In September 2007, she arrived in Perugia, Italy, as an exchange student at the University for Foreigners. She chose Perugia because it was a picturesque and less crowded city where she could genuinely connect with the local way of life. Meredith moved into a 4-bedroom cottage on Via della Pergola, sharing the space with 2 Italian women, Filomena Romanelli and Laura Mezzetti, and a 20-year-old American student named Amanda Knox. According to those who knew both young women, Meredith and Amanda were completely different in personality. 24-year-old Giacomo Silenzi, an Italian who had dated Meredith, described them as being like chalk and cheese, totally opposite in character. He said Meredith was calm, sweet, and shy, while Amanda was an extrovert who was always showing off. Despite their differences, the living arrangement seemed to work well initially, with no reported conflicts between the roommates. On the evening of November 1, 2007, Meredith spent time with her British friends before returning to the cottage she shared with Amanda. That same evening, Amanda had dinner with her Italian boyfriend, Rafael Solicito, whom she had been dating for about a week. According to Amanda's account, she spent the night at Rafael's apartment, which was located nearby. What happened next would forever change the lives of everyone involved and spark one of the most controversial criminal cases in modern history. The following morning, November 2, 2007, Amanda returned to the cottage around 10:30 a.m. She later told police that she found the front door slightly ajar, which seemed unusual to her. Inside, she discovered drops of what appeared to be dried spots in the bathroom she shared with Meredith, and feces left unflushed in the other bathroom's toilet. Most concerning of all, Meredith's bedroom door was locked, which was unusual since Meredith never locked her door when she was away. Amanda called Meredith's British cell phone, but there was no answer. Feeling uneasy, she called her mother in Seattle, took a shower, and then returned to Rafael's apartment. Around 11:30 a.m., Amanda and Rafael returned to the cottage together. They were soon joined by the postal police, who had come to return 2 cell phones belonging to Meredith that had been found in a garden about 1 kilometer away. When Filomena Romanelli, one of the Italian roommates, arrived at the cottage after receiving a telephone call from Amanda, she became increasingly concerned. The postal police asked to be let into the house, and when they saw the locked bedroom door, they requested that it be opened. Initially, the police declined to force the door, but Romanelli's male friend eventually broke it down around 1:15 p.m. Inside Meredith's bedroom, they made a heartbreaking discovery. The young woman was found lying on the floor, partially clothed and covered by a duvet. It was immediately clear that she had lost her life in a violent manner. The room showed evidence of a struggle, and authorities quickly determined this was no accident. Dr. Luca Lalli, a pathologist from Perugia's Forensic Science Institute, performed the examination. His findings revealed that Meredith had sustained multiple injuries consistent with an assault, and that she had attempted to defend herself. Evidence also suggested she had been forcibly restrained and subjected to harm of an intimate nature. The investigation immediately focused on those who had access to the cottage. On November 5, 2007, Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito were taken to the police station for questioning. During the lengthy interrogation that followed on November 5-6, Amanda's account of events began to change under intense pressure from investigators. After hours of questioning without a lawyer present, Amanda signed 2 statements that would dramatically alter the course of the investigation. In these statements, Amanda implicated Patrick Lumumba, the Congolese owner of the cafe where she worked part-time, claiming he was involved in Meredith's death. She also placed herself at the cottage during the time of the incident, contradicting her earlier claims. Later that same day, she wrote a handwritten letter expressing doubt about her accusations, but the damage was already done. On November 6, 2007, Amanda Knox, Raphael Solicito, and Patrick Lumumba were all arrested in connection with Meredith's death. However, the case took another turn when investigators discovered physical evidence pointing to a different suspect entirely. Fingerprints found at the scene belonged to Ruddy Herman Ged, a 20-year-old man from the Ivory Coast who had been living in Perugia. Ged had met Meredith briefly at a party just days before her death. On November 19, 2007, police identified Ged as a suspect, and he was arrested the following day in Mainz, Germany, where he had fled after the incident. Meanwhile, Patrick Lumumba was released from prison on November 19, after investigations revealed he had a solid alibi, having been at work at his cafe with numerous witnesses who could account for his whereabouts. Ged was extradited back to Italy, where he admitted to being present at the cottage on the night of November 1, but maintained his innocence regarding the crime itself. He chose to be tried under a fast-track procedure, which typically results in a reduced sentence if convicted. In October 2008, Judge Paolo Micheli found Ged guilty of taking part in Meredith's demise and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. However, following an appeal in 2009, his sentence was reduced to 16 years. Despite Ged's conviction, the case against Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito continued to move forward. The trial of Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito began on January 16, 2009, before Judge Giancarlo Massacre, Deputy Judge Beatrice Cristiani, and 6 lay judges at the Court of Assizes in Perugia. The courtroom proceedings would capture international attention for nearly 11 months, with media from around the world documenting every development. Prosecutors argued that Meredith had lost her life during a situation involving intimate violence that had escalated beyond control. They claimed that Raphael had restrained Meredith while Amanda threatened her with a knife and Ged committed acts of intimate violence. The prosecution presented various pieces of evidence, including a knife found in Raphael's kitchen that they claimed was the weapon used in the attack. They also pointed to a footprint found on a bath mat in one of the cottage's bathrooms, which they argued belonged to Raphael. However, the defense challenged much of this evidence, with forensic experts testifying that the footprint did not match Raphael's foot measurements. The knife evidence was also disputed, with defense experts questioning the reliability of DNA testing that had been conducted on trace amounts of biological material. Throughout the trial, Amanda's behavior and statements during her initial interrogation remained a central focus. Prosecutors argued that her accusation of Patrick Lumumba showed consciousness of guilt and knowledge of the crime. The defense countered that Amanda had been subjected to intense psychological pressure during questioning that lasted through the night without legal representation, leading her to make false statements. Amanda herself would later describe the interrogation as abusive, claiming that investigators had struck her and applied psychological intimidation tactics. On December 4, 2009, after deliberating for over 11 hours, the jury delivered their verdict. Both Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito were found guilty on charges of taking part in Meredith's demise and committing acts of intimate violence. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years in prison, while Raphael received a 25-year sentence. Prosecutors had originally sought life imprisonment for both defendants. Amanda broke down sobbing as the guilty verdict was read in the packed courtroom. Her family immediately announced their intention to appeal, calling the verdict a failure of the Italian judicial system. The case, however, was far from over. Amanda and Raphael's defense teams filed appeals, and their second-level trial began in late 2010. After reviewing the evidence and hearing from additional forensic experts, the appeals court reached a different conclusion. On October 3, 2011, after Amanda and Raphael had served nearly 4 years in prison, the appeals court overturned their convictions for the main charges. The court found that the scientific evidence was insufficient to support the guilty verdicts, citing problems with DNA testing and other forensic procedures. Amanda immediately returned to the United States following her release, while Raphael remained in Italy. However, their legal troubles were not yet finished. In 2013, Italy's Supreme Court of Cassation declared the acquittals invalid due to what they termed manifest illogicalities, ordering that the appeals trials be held again. The new appeals trial took place in Florence, where both Amanda and Raphael were convicted once again in 2014, receiving similar sentences to their original convictions. Finally, on March 27, 2015, Italy's highest court, the Supreme Court of Cassation, definitively acquitted both Amanda Knox and Raphael Solicito. The court invoked a provision of Italian law regarding reasonable doubt and ordered that no further trials should be held, bringing the 8-year legal saga to an end. The verdict noted that there had been sensational investigative failures, amnesia, and culpable omissions on the part of the investigating authorities. Ruddy Gedd remained the only person definitively convicted in connection with Meredith's death. In 2020, an Italian court ruled that he could complete the remainder of his sentence through community service, and he was released from prison in November 2021. Throughout this lengthy legal process, Meredith's family endured years of uncertainty and pain. Her mother Arlen gave interviews describing the ongoing anguish of not knowing the complete truth about what happened to her daughter. Her sister Stephanie spoke about the difficulty of living without Meredith, particularly after the guilty verdicts were reinstated in 2014. The family faced additional tragedy in subsequent years, losing both parents after Meredith's death. John Kircher, the respected journalist and children's author, passed away in 2020, having spent his final years seeking answers about his daughter's fate. The case raised important questions about international media coverage of criminal proceedings, the reliability of forensic evidence, and the treatment of suspects during police interrogations. Legal experts and forensic scientists from around the world examined the evidence and procedures, with many expressing concerns about the investigative methods used and the strength of the evidence presented. The lengthy appeals process highlighted differences between the Italian and American legal systems, particularly regarding the ability to retry cases after acquittal. For Meredith's family, no legal verdict could restore what they had lost. She had been a young woman with bright prospects, studying abroad to pursue her dreams of journalism and international relations. Her life was cut short at age 21, just as she was beginning to explore the world and develop her potential. Those who knew her remembered her smile, her determination, and her loving nature. Though the legal proceedings eventually concluded, the pain of her absence continues to be felt by all who loved her, serving as a reminder of a vibrant life that ended far too soon. In memory of Meredith Kircher, we extend our deepest condolences to her family and all who cherished her. She deserved to live out her dreams and return safely home to those who loved her most. The antique shop mystery that terrifies Wales to this day. On a warm Saturday morning in June 1990, a grandmother stepped out of her antique shop for what she promised would be just 2 minutes, leaving behind a handwritten note that would become one of Wales' most enduring mysteries. Trevelyan Evans never returned, and her disappearance would launch one of the largest investigations in North Wales history, leaving a family shattered and a community haunted by unanswered questions. Trevelyan Davies was born on September 6, 1937, in Wales, where she would spend her entire life in the picturesque town of Llangollen. By 1990, she was 52 years old, a devoted mother to her son Richard, and a grandmother who had found joy in pursuing her lifelong passion for antiques. After years of collecting as a hobby, she had finally achieved her dream of opening Attic Antiques in 1989, a small shop on Church Street near the town centre. She was known throughout the community for buying from locals, dealers, and travellers passing through the Welsh countryside. Trevelyan was married to Richard Evans, and together they had recently purchased a holiday bungalow in Rhuddlan, a coastal town approximately an hour away from Llangollen. The couple had been working on renovating their new property, and Richard later recalled how happy Trevelyan seemed while working in the garden and fixing up their retreat. However, beneath the surface of what appeared to be a content life, there were signs that all was not well in their marriage. Those close to the couple knew there had been problems, with allegations of infidelity casting a shadow over their relationship. During the week leading up to June 16, 1990, Trevelyan and Richard had been staying at their Rhuddlan bungalow, working on renovations together. Richard remembered this time fondly, describing Trevelyan as being in good spirits while they worked side by side on their project. On Wednesday, June 13, Trevelyan returned to Llangollen to reopen her antique shop after their brief getaway, while Richard remained at the coastal property to continue the renovation work. The days following her return to Llangollen would prove significant to investigators. On Thursday morning, June 14, at exactly 9:15 a.m., a local woman walking past Attic Antiques noticed Trevelyan outside her shop, engaged in conversation with two men. Witnesses described one as older and one as younger, both appearing to know Trevelyan well enough to hold her attention. The following day, Friday, the older of the two men was seen with Trevelyan again, this time drawing more detailed observations from passers-by. He was described as distinguished-looking and impeccably dressed, wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a black briefcase that suggested he was a professional of some kind. That Friday evening, a couple driving down Castle Street made an observation that would later seem significant to investigators. They noticed Trevelyan standing in the doorway of a cafe, holding what appeared to be a piece of paper in her hand. She seemed to be searching for someone, repeatedly stepping in and out of the doorway while looking up and down the street with an air of expectancy. Her behavior suggested she was waiting for someone specific, though the identity of that person would remain unknown. Saturday, June 16, 1990, began like any other day for Trevelyan. She opened Attic Antiques and tended to her regular customers, appearing normal and content to those who interacted with her. Around 12:30 p.m., a friend stopped by the shop for a brief visit, finding Trevelyan in good spirits and showing no signs of distress. Shortly after her friend departed, Trevelyan made a decision that would change everything. She handwrote a simple note that read "back in 2 minutes" and pinned it to the front door of her shop before stepping out into the busy Saturday afternoon crowd. Her first stop was just down the street to a fruit vendor on Castle Street, Llangollen's main thoroughfare, where she purchased an apple and a banana. The streets were crowded with weekend shoppers and tourists, and numerous people who knew Trevelyan spotted her during this errand. Everyone who saw her that day would later tell investigators that she appeared perfectly normal, showing no signs of anxiety, fear, or unusual behavior. She seemed like a woman simply running a quick errand before returning to work. At 2:30 p.m., a friend who knew Trevelyan well made what would become the last confirmed sighting of her alive. This person saw her walking near her home on Market Street, still appearing relaxed and unhurried. After this point, Trevelyan Evans seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only unconfirmed glimpses and mounting questions. 2 additional sightings were reported to police, though their accuracy would never be definitively established. At approximately 2:35 p.m., just 5 minutes after the confirmed sighting near her home, someone reported seeing a woman matching Trevelyan's description walking along the A5 highway, leading out of Llangollen toward Corwin. This person appeared to be heading away from town on foot, near Riverside Park by the River Dee. Then, at 3:45 p.m., Another witness claimed to have seen a woman who looked like Trevelyan walking into Park Avenue from the direction of the river. However, investigators could never fully verify these sightings, leaving a crucial gap in the timeline of her final hours. As the afternoon wore on and Attic Antiques remained closed, customers began to notice something was wrong. Despite the shop being unattended, several people made purchases from the display boxes outside, leaving their money through the postal slot, as was common practice when Trevelyan stepped out briefly. However, as 6 p.m. approached and the shop remained closed well past normal business hours, concern began to grow among those who knew her routine. Meanwhile, Richard Evans was continuing his renovation work at their Rithland bungalow, unaware that anything was amiss. When he called home that evening expecting to speak with his wife, there was no answer. After trying several times with the same result, he began calling friends and neighbors to ask if they had seen Trevelyan. When everyone he contacted said they hadn't seen her since midday, Richard's concern turned to alarm. He asked a neighbor to check on the antique shop, and the man's discovery confirmed Richard's worst fears. The neighbor found Trevelyan's car still parked exactly where she had left it that morning, just 200 yards from the shop. Attic Antiques was locked tight, with a handwritten note still pinned to the door. Inside the shop, investigators would later find all of Trevelyan's personal belongings exactly as she had left them. Her purse, car keys, and coat remained untouched, along with fruit and flowers that a friend had given her earlier that morning. Everything indicated that she had indeed planned to return within minutes, just as her note promised. At approximately 11 p.m. that night, Richard reported his wife missing to the police. The investigation that followed became one of the most extensive missing person cases in North Wales history. Police launched a massive search operation that would span months and involve unprecedented resources. Every household in Llangollen was visited and interviewed, with investigators expanding their canvas to neighboring towns as the search intensified. A total of 330 formal statements were taken from witnesses, friends, neighbors, and anyone who might have had contact with Trevelyan. More than 1,500 names were cross-checked and investigated within a 12-mile radius of Llangollen. Approximately 700 vehicles were logged and systematically eliminated from the inquiry as detectives worked to account for every possible lead. Search teams conducted extensive physical searches of the surrounding countryside, exploring mine shafts, caves, the River Dee, and the Llangollen Canal in hopes of finding any trace of the missing woman. Missing person posters featuring Trevelyan's photograph were distributed throughout the town and surrounding areas. Richard Evans, desperate for answers about his wife's fate, offered a £5,000 reward for any information that could help solve the case. Despite these exhaustive efforts, investigators found no substantial physical evidence or credible leads that could explain what had happened to Trevelyan. As the investigation progressed and months passed without answers, police began to focus more intensively on those closest to Trevelyan. Her marriage to Richard, already strained by allegations of infidelity, came under scrutiny. Investigators learned that the couple's relationship had been troubled, with problems that extended beyond what many in the community had realized. This knowledge, combined with the statistical reality that spouses are often involved in cases of disappearance, made Richard Evans a person of significant interest to detectives. In January 2001, more than a decade after Trevelyan's disappearance, North Wales Police made the decision to reopen the case. New forensic techniques and technologies that had been developed during the intervening years offered hope that fresh evidence might emerge. As part of this renewed investigation, Richard Evans, then 72 years old, was arrested and brought in for questioning. He was taken to Wrexham Police Station, where detectives conducted extensive interviews, hoping that time and new investigative approaches might yield different results. However, after thorough questioning, Richard was released without any charges being filed against him. The evidence, despite years of investigation and technological advances, remained insufficient to support any criminal charges. The case was reopened again in 2010 on the 20th anniversary of Trevaline's disappearance, with her brother Len Davies making public pleas for anyone with information to come forward. Detective Chief Inspector Colin Edwards, who had worked on the case for years, described it as the strangest inquiry he had ever encountered. He expressed the bafflement felt by investigators, stating, "How a happily married woman could vanish without trace on a sunny Saturday morning in a busy town centre is totally baffling." When Richard Evans was asked to comment on the 20th anniversary of his wife's disappearance, he declined to speak publicly about the case. In early 2019, the case took an unexpected and dramatic turn when two brothers, Andrew and Lee Sutton from Wrexham and Kinmel Bay, contacted North Wales police with what they claimed was breakthrough information. The men alleged that they had obtained evidence suggesting Trevaline had been harmed and her remains hidden beneath Rhythlen Golf Club. They requested permission from the club to conduct an investigation using specialized ground-penetrating equipment. On March 14, 2019, they performed their examination and claimed their camera had detected human remains. They further stated that these findings had been verified by a forensic expert. Following this tip, police launched a full excavation of the golf club on March 19, 2019. The operation began at 11:00 a.m. with officers using X-ray equipment to examine the bar area of the club. An officer was stationed overnight during the excavation to ensure the integrity of the site. However, despite the extensive search, no human remains were discovered. The Sutton brothers maintained their conviction that their images showed evidence of a body at the location. They filed a formal complaint about the police handling of the situation and made claims that the remains had been removed during the 5 days between their investigation and the official police excavation. They also reported receiving threatening phone calls following their involvement in the case, with one brother saying his window had been damaged. In a bizarre twist that added even more mystery to an already complex case, a memorial bench appeared in January 2021 along the Presterton Dysarth Walkway, approximately 4 miles from Rhythlen. The bench bore a metal plaque with an inscription that referenced Trevaline's case directly. The message read, "In memory of T.I.V.L. EVANS, vanished RIP." The appearance of this unauthorized memorial, with its specific references to dates and locations connected to the investigation, raised new questions about who might have knowledge of the case that hadn't been shared with authorities. The years following Trevaline's disappearance brought additional heartbreak to her family. Her only son, Richard Evans, who had been serving as a North Wales police officer, passed away in 1999 from a heart attack at the young age of 37. This tragic loss meant that Trevaline, if she were still alive somewhere, had missed the opportunity to reconcile with her child. Her husband Richard Evans died in 2015, taking with him any secrets he may have held about his wife's fate. Trevaline's younger brother, Len Davies, remained the primary family member advocating for answers, continuing to hope that someday the truth about his sister's disappearance would finally be revealed. Over the decades, there have been reported sightings of Trevaline in various locations around the world. These alleged sightings have taken investigators to places as distant as a remote town in Australia and various locations in London. Interpol even investigated a potential sighting in France, though none of these international leads ever produced credible evidence. Police also explored potential connections to known serial killers, including Robin Liggis, but ruled out any links after thorough investigation. Each lead, no matter how promising it initially appeared, ultimately led to another dead end. Despite the passage of more than 3 decades, North Wales Police has maintained that the case remains open and active. Detective Chief Inspector Colin Edwards' assessment that this was the strangest inquiry of his career continues to resonate among those familiar with the case. The fundamental question remains as baffling today as it was in 1990. How does a woman disappear without a trace from a busy town centre on a Saturday afternoon, leaving behind no physical evidence, no credible witnesses to any crime, and no clear motive for anyone to cause her harm. The investigation revealed no evidence that Trevelyan had any intention of starting a new life elsewhere. She had no access to significant funds that would enable her to disappear voluntarily, and she left behind all her personal possessions. The theory of intentional disappearance became even less plausible when major life events occurred that would have prompted her to make contact if she were alive. Her father's death and her son's tragic passing in 1999 were events that, according to investigators, would have compelled her to reach out to family if she were capable of doing so. Her brothers, Len and Philip, never received any communication from her during these difficult times. The possibility that Trevelyan took her own life has been largely dismissed by those who knew her best and by investigators familiar with the case. Her frame of mind and character, according to family members and friends, made such an action highly unlikely. She had recently achieved her dream of opening the antique shop and had been working happily on the Rithland bungalow with Richard just days before her disappearance. These factors, combined with the lack of any note or indication of despair, led investigators to conclude that intentional self-harm was not a credible explanation. This leaves the most troubling possibility, that Trevelyan Evans was taken against her will and lost her life due to the actions of another person. As time has passed, this theory has gained strength among investigators. The complete absence of any trace of her, despite extensive searches and the passage of decades, suggests that someone with knowledge of the area and perhaps local connections was responsible. The fact that no disturbance was witnessed at or near the shop indicates that if she was taken, it was likely by someone she knew and trusted enough to accompany willingly. The proximity of houses to the Church Street location would have made any forced abduction from the shop itself highly visible to neighbors. The 90-minute window between confirmed sightings of Trevelyan that afternoon remains one of the most frustrating aspects of the case for investigators. During this crucial time period, her movements are completely unaccounted for, leaving open the possibility that she was with her abductor during these vital minutes. What they might have been doing and where they went during this time continues to perplex those working to solve the case. The banana peel found in the garbage can of the antique shop suggests she may have returned there at some point after making her fruit purchase, but investigators have no way of confirming whether this was from the banana she bought on June 16 or from an earlier day. The case of Trevelyan Evans represents one of those rare investigations where every conventional approach has been exhausted without yielding answers. Decades of police work, technological advances, public appeals, and renewed investigations have all failed to provide the breakthrough that her family desperately seeks. Her story serves as a reminder of how someone can simply vanish, leaving behind only questions and the enduring pain of those who love them. Today, more than 35 years after that Saturday morning in June 1990, Trevelyan Evans remains missing, and her family continues to seek the truth about what happened to a beloved wife, mother, and grandmother who promised to return in just 2 minutes. Her memory lives on in the hearts of those who knew her and in the determination of investigators who refuse to let her case be forgotten. The hope remains that someday, someone will come forward with the information needed to finally solve this enduring mystery and provide the answers that have been so long in coming. The disappearance of Trevelyan Evans stands as a testament to a family's love and a community's refusal to forget. Though Richard and their son have both passed away, and though decades have gone by without resolution, her brother Len and others who cared for her continue to believe that the truth will eventually emerge. Until that day comes, Trevelyan's story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly a normal day can become a lifetime of unanswered questions, and how the simple act of stepping outside for 2 minutes can lead to a mystery that spans generations. The case of Claire Tiltman. Claire Tiltman was 16 years old when she lost her life on a cold January evening in 1993, just 4 days after celebrating her birthday. She was the only child of Linda and Cliff Tiltman, who had raised her with love in the quiet Horns Cross area of Stone, near Greenhithe in Dartford, Kent. Her parents cherished their bright, ambitious daughter, who attended Dartford Grammar School for Girls, where her friends affectionately called her Tilts. She was someone who drew people to her naturally, with what the judge would later describe as an engaging and lively personality that made her extremely popular with a wide circle of friends. Claire had just completed her mock GCSE exams and was in year 11, regularly discussing college plans and her future with classmates. She was deeply involved in the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme, working toward her bronze award through activities at the local Dartford fire station. Her dream was to become a firefighter, a goal that reflected her caring nature and desire to help others. Her school friends remembered her as beautiful and loyal, with a wicked sense of humor, someone who was funny and ambitious, and brought light to every room she entered. These were the qualities that made Claire special to everyone who knew her, from her devoted parents to the many friends who would later form the Justice for Claire campaign to keep her memory alive. The Tiltman family belonged to the local British Legion Club, a community gathering place where they had built friendships over the years. It was through this connection that they knew another family, the Ash-Smiths, who also attended club events regularly. Colin Ash-Smith was 8 years older than Claire, 24 at the time, and lived with his parents on Milton Street in nearby Swanscoop. He occasionally played pool with Claire during family visits to the club, creating what seemed like a harmless acquaintance between their families. No one could have imagined that this familiar face would later be linked to such devastating events. On the evening of January 18, 1993, Claire left her family home to visit a friend, taking what should have been a simple, safe walk through her neighborhood. It was just after 6:20 p.m. when she entered a dark alleyway that served as a shortcut off the A226 London Road, close to her home in Greenhithe. This pathway was one she had used many times before, a routine part of moving through her familiar community. But on this night, someone was waiting in the shadows, someone who had been planning something harmful. What happened next changed everything for the Tiltman family and the entire Dartford community. Claire was subjected to a violent attack, harmed repeatedly by someone who struck from behind. Passers-by discovered her shortly after the incident began and immediately tried to help, but despite their efforts and the quick arrival of emergency services, Claire did not survive. She had been targeted in what prosecutors would later describe as a savage and brutal act of violence by someone who took pleasure in causing harm. The investigation that followed was exhaustive, involving hundreds of officers and thousands of tips from the public. Claire's photograph appeared on front pages across the nation as police appealed for any information that might lead to her attacker. Her parents, Linda and Cliff, kept the case in the public eye for years, never giving up hope that justice would eventually come. They attended press conferences, spoke to reporters, and maintained their belief that someone in their community knew who had taken their daughter's life. The pain in their voices was evident when they spoke at Claire's funeral, with Linda saying, "You look around and you hope that it's someone you don't know, but we don't know. That person could have been there. I hope that they weren't. I'll never ever forgive that person for whatever reason. That person's got to be caught." Despite the intensive initial investigation, the case went cold for nearly 2 decades. Colin Ash-Smith attended Claire's funeral, standing among the mourners as her family and friends said their final goodbyes. He continued living in the same area, working as a milkman, while carrying the secret of what he had done. But his violent tendencies didn't end with Claire's loss. In 1995, just 2 years later, he attacked another young woman, Charlotte Barnard, in the same area of Greenhithe. Charlotte was harmed many times but miraculously survived. When Ash-Smith was eventually caught and convicted for this attack, police found evidence that connected him to an even earlier crime from 1988. The breakthrough that would finally bring justice for Claire came through an unexpected source. While serving time in prison for his other attacks, Ash-Smith befriended a fellow prisoner named Paul Dubois. During their conversations, Ash-Smith began sharing details about his violent acts, perhaps feeling safe in the environment of criminals around him. He specifically mentioned attacking someone he had seen using a zebra crossing, providing details that would prove crucial to investigators when the case was reopened. This confession, combined with modern forensic techniques and changes in legal procedures that allowed evidence of previous crimes to be presented in court, would finally give prosecutors the tools they needed. In 2010, the Kent Police Cold Case Unit received special funding to re-examine Claire's case using advanced forensic methods that hadn't been available in 1993. The investigation team, led by Detective Superintendent Rob Vinson from the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate Cold Case Team, worked methodically through old evidence and new leads. On the 19th anniversary of Claire's loss, in April 2012, her father Cliff made another public plea for information, still hoping for answers after nearly 2 decades of waiting. The Justice for Claire campaign, formed by her high school friends, organized memorial events, including a candlelit walk in January 2013 that retraced Claire's final steps. These efforts kept pressure on authorities and ensured that Claire's case remained in public consciousness. When Colin Ash Smith was finally arrested and charged with Claire's death, he was already serving 3 life sentences for his attacks on other women. The evidence against him included not only the prison confession, but also details about his distinctive white Ford Capri, which witnesses had seen in the area. Police found that he had given a false alibi for the night of Claire's loss, making a deliberately timed phone call to create the appearance that he was elsewhere. Most damaging were his own detailed writings, which he called plans, documenting his attacks and plotting future violence. The trial took place at Inner London Crown Court in Southwark in late 2014, more than 21 years after Claire lost her life. Prosecutor Brian Altman QC described Ash Smith as a ruthless predatory offender who took pleasure in violence. The Crown's case painted a picture of a man who had planned Claire's loss carefully, choosing her as a vulnerable target. Evidence was presented about Ash Smith's previous convictions, his collection of dangerous objects, and his habit of taking midnight walks, while carrying items capable of causing harm and looking for people to attack. Taking the witness stand in his own defense, Ash Smith admitted to being an animal when describing his previous attacks. He testified about his obsession with women and his hatred toward them, explaining that he feared their power over him. "I didn't like them because I felt they had power over me," he told the court. "My own perception of them was I couldn't trust them because they used me. I felt worthless, low self-esteem, and I had no confidence around other people. I wasn't happy around most people." He admitted to keeping a stash of dangerous objects and writing detailed accounts of his attacks. However, despite these admissions about his other crimes, he insisted that he had not taken Claire's life. The defense team attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's case by suggesting that serial offender Robert Napper, who had taken the lives of multiple women in London during the same time period, might have been responsible for Claire's death. They also tried to discredit the prison confession and argued that there was no direct physical evidence linking Ash Smith to the scene. But the prosecution had built a comprehensive case that included not only the confession, but also the pattern of Ash Smith's behavior, his false alibi, and his access to Claire through their family connection at the British Legion Club. The judge, Mr. Justice Sweeney, made a significant legal decision by allowing evidence of Ash Smith's previous crimes to be presented to the jury. This was one of the earliest high-profile applications of the 2003 Criminal Justice Act's provisions in London, marking an important precedent for future cases. The jurors heard extensive testimony about Ash Smith's 1988 and 1995 convictions and listened to readings from his detailed plans. The evidence painted a clear picture of a man who derived satisfaction from causing serious harm to vulnerable women. After 5 weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury took just 3 hours to reach their verdict. On December 11, 2014, Colin Ash Smith was found guilty of taking Claire Tiltman's life. About a dozen of Claire's school friends were present in the gallery to hear the decision, many breaking down in tears as justice was finally served. Ash Smith stared straight ahead as the verdict was read, showing no visible emotion. The following day, December 12, 2014, Mr. Justice Sweeney delivered the sentence. Ash Smith was given life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. The judge explained that under the old sentencing guidelines, this was roughly equivalent to what he would have received if the case had been prosecuted in 1993. I have no doubt that this was a premeditated act that you carried out because of the feeling of power that it gave you, Justice Sweeney told Ash Smith. In so doing, you not only ended Claire's young life, which was so full of promise, but you also caused unbearable grief and upset to her family and friends. Ash Smith, who was 46 at the time of sentencing, reacted impassively as the life term was imposed. He was not present in court for the sentencing hearing. Justice Sweeney praised the Kent police for their dedication in bringing Claire's case to trial and commended the members of Claire's family and friends who had attended the proceedings. I would also like to commend the members of Claire's family and her friends who have attended this trial for the dignified way in which they have conducted themselves, the judge said, and I express my sorrow for the burden they have had to carry for many years at Claire's untimely loss. Following the conviction, Detective Superintendent Rob Vinson spoke about the impact of the case, describing Ash Smith as an evil and predatory man who had snatched her life away. It should have been a day like any other, he said. Then on that day, Ash Smith has not only taken her life, taken her future as well, and destroyed the lives of her family and friends. Jaswant Nawal, CPS Southeast Chief Crown Prosecutor, called it one of the most complex cases that CPS Southeast had dealt with in recent years. In November 2015, Ash Smith attempted to appeal his conviction, arguing that Justice Sweeney had wrongly allowed gravely prejudicial material to be presented to the jury. However, his appeal was rejected by Lord Justice Davis and two other Lords Justice of Appeal, who declared his case unarguable. He remains imprisoned at HMP Durham, serving his sentence for taking Claire's life, along with his previous convictions. Tragically, both Linda and Cliff Tiltman passed away before they could see their daughter's case resolved. They had spent years believing that Colin Ash Smith was responsible for Claire's death, but they never lived to see him held accountable. Their unwavering dedication to seeking justice for their only child kept the case alive in public memory and contributed to the eventual breakthrough that led to the conviction. The loss of these devoted parents, who carried the burden of their grief for over 2 decades, adds another layer of heartbreak to this already devastating story. Claire Tiltman's story represents both the worst of human nature and the best of community resilience. Her life, though cut tragically short, touched countless people who refused to let her memory fade away. The dedication of her friends, the persistence of law enforcement, and the love of her parents ensured that justice eventually prevailed, even though it came far too late for those who loved her most.